Hello and welcome to this video where we will show you how to write a good literature section for your bachelor's or master thesis. In the first part of the video, we will cover the essential conceptual foundations you need to know. In the second part, we will show you how to most efficiently find the perfect structure for your literature section. In the third and final part, we will present examples of particularly well-structured literature sections that you can similarly apply in your bachelor's or master thesis. Note that you can download all the role model papers used in this video right below it. Firstly, it's crucial to remember the actual purpose of the literature section. As mentioned in Module 1, the literature part is not about showing your supervisor everything you have read on your topic. That doesn't add value, and frankly, your supervisor isn't interested in that. For instance, if you're writing a paper on the effects of financial crisis, then literature section isn't about just citing every publication you have found on the topic of financial crisis. No, the real purpose of the literature chapter is to deepen and further discuss the research problem you have already introduced in the introduction. Deepening thereby means showing your readers that the understanding of the problem in the literature is indeed inadequate and/or the answers to your research question are insufficient or contradictory. In other words, you need to demonstrate that the problem is more complex than we thought. Another purpose of the literature section is to define as precisely as possible the key concepts you use in your thesis. As you will see in the examples below, you can also do this in the introduction, depending on how well known and novel the concepts are that you intend to use in your thesis. The ideal structure of the literature section looks something like this. First, you make a section on the conceptual background where you define the key concepts used in your study. For instance, if you're exploring the relationship between nutrition and school performance, you could start your literature section by defining the two concepts of nutrition and school performance. This sets a solid foundation for your entire thesis by clearly clarifying what is meant by these two concepts in the context of your work. Second, you can then start the actual literature analysis and demonstrate what knowledge and opinions exist in the scientific community about the relationship between nutrition and school performance. To stick with the same example, you might identify two different theories, perspectives, or schools of thought on this topic in the literature. The first group of scientists might have concluded that high-quality nutrition significantly correlates with better school performance. A second group of researchers, however, may have found no clear correlation between nutrition and school performance and argue that other factors, such as socioeconomic environment or physical activity, play a bigger role. Third, and this is already the final section of your literature part, you can reasonably conclude that there are various, sometimes contradictory or incomplete, responses to the question of the relationship between nutrition and school performance. In this context, you can also describe which aspect of this apparently unresolved research problem your thesis specifically addresses. If you wish, you can list 2 to 3 research or knowledge gaps here, pointing out that your thesis now addresses these gaps. Before we move on to specific examples and show you how the structure for the theoretical section is implemented in practice, we would like to point out how to most efficiently find the ideal structure for the literature section of your bachelor's or master thesis. The approach is simple and consists of the following 4 steps. First, visit the website vhbonline.org, where you will find a list of all the journals relevant in the field of business-related studies. Focus especially on journals that are highly rated, for example those that have an A, B, or C in the third column. Second, select 2 to 3 thematic journals that match your topic. For instance, if you're writing a paper in marketing, the European Journal of Marketing or the International Marketing Review might be good choices. Third, skim through the theory chapters of recent articles that have ideally applied a similar methodological approach to what you plan to use in your thesis. The fourth step is then to simply apply the most suitable structure you found to your own thesis. Please note that this has nothing to do with plagiarism. On the contrary, if you look at the series of scientific publications, you will notice that many have a very similar structure, and that's not a coincidence. Scientific papers are essentially documentations of what, why, and how research was conducted and what results that have been obtained. Regardless of whether you are writing a qualitative or quantitative paper, scientists, including your supervisor, therefore actually expect you to adhere to the established structures and methodologies used in their respective disciplines. And yes, Don't fool yourself. Even if you have found the perfect structure for you and your thesis, writing a good literature section remains a challenging task. Let's now dive into concrete examples so you can see firsthand how real, well-constructed literature sections look like in practice. The first example is the publication that explored whether the number of suppliers positively or negatively influenced the impact of supply chain disruptions for companies during the COVID-19 pandemic. When you look at how the authors structured the literature section, you will notice it closely follows the ideal structure we showed you in slide 4. They begin the literature section by outlining the context of their work. Specifically, they describe the different phases in which supply chain disruptions generally manifest, thereby delving deeper into the research problem. Specifically, they observe that although it is generally recognized that supply chain disruptions extend over various phases, most existing studies only consider the impacts of such disruptions at a single point in time. In contrast, their study examines the influence at multiple points in time. Next, they define a series of concepts under the title Supply-Based Concentration. In this section, there are at least 2 strategically smart tactics that you can directly apply in your own thesis. First, they don't define the concepts arbitrarily, but use definitions already existing in the literature on this topic, citing the respective sources. Secondly, they simultaneously visualize the concepts and demonstrate how they are interconnected. This is also a strategically clever move because it helps the readers to better understand and follow the context and the research question underlying the study. After setting the context and defining the key concepts, they delve into the actual literature review under the title Benefits and Limitations of Supply-Based Concentration. As you can see, they start by deepening the research problem introduced in the introduction, pointing out that existing literature provides conflicting arguments and answers to whether the number of suppliers positively or negatively influences the impact of supply chain disruptions. They continue by describing these different findings and opinions in the literature and conclude the section with a summarizing statement that although much has been written and researched about the topic, the answers remain insufficient and contradictory. Finally, they develop 3 specific hypotheses from the theory to be tested in the study. As hypothesis development is a speciality of deductive quantitative studies, we won't delve deeper into this part of the literature section in this video. For you, the key takeaways from this example for your own thesis are: first, define all the important concepts you use in your thesis. Where possible, use an existing definition from the literature of a reputable journal and cite it. If you have several different concepts, consider creating a small sketch to show the readers how the concepts are related to each other. This can be particularly valuable in quantitative studies, examining the influence of one variable x on another variable y. Secondly, tables are your friends, especially in the literature section. We haven't touched on this for clarity, but if you revisit the example publication, you will notice that the authors of this study also utilized the stylistic device of a table in their literature chapter. In the very first sentence of the actual literature review, they mentioned that they have included Table 1 in the appendix, summarizing selected studies on the topic. These tables are not only extremely valuable for your readers, but also for you, as they help you keep an overview of the different findings and opinions in the literature on a particular topic. The second example is an article in the Journal of Banking and Finance, where the authors investigated whether and how the composition of boards in the 50 largest Chinese banks affects the performance and asset quality of each bank. When you look at how these authors structured the literature section, you will notice that they also start by describing the context of their work and analysis. Specifically under the title An Overview of Chinese Bank Governance Reform, they outline in 5 steps how the corporate governance system in Chinese banking sector has changed in recent years. Then, under the title Literature Review and Hypothesis Development, they provide a brief overview of relevant literature in the field of corporate governance in the banking sector. Note that they deepen the research problem introduced in the introduction. This is evident from the very first sentence of this section, when they highlight the limited understanding of the role of boards in the banking sector, even in developed countries. And they reinforce this statement with a clever stylistic device that you can also use. They support their claim with the following direct quote from Adams and Merritt. Quote, "Most studies of board effectiveness exclude financial firms from their samples. As a result, we know very little about the effectiveness of banking firm governance." End quote. As you can see, this is a very elegant because it shows that the relevance and justification for the study are not just subjective assessments, but are actually broadly supported by the existing literature. What you can also take away from this example is the usefulness of Venn diagrams. Specifically, it can be extremely helpful for you, regardless of the topic you're working on, to create such a diagram summarizing the literature streams that are directly or indirectly connected to your topic. Once you have such a diagram, you can almost directly derive the structure of your literature section from it. In our specific example, we have the following 3 literature streams. 1. Chinese banking system, meaning all literature and publications that generally deal with the Chinese banking system. 2. Bank board governance, including all publications revolving around the topic of bank board governance. And 3. Bank performance, including all publications that deal with the performance of banks. The third publication we present as an example is an empirical study that investigated the best practice measures of government organizations during natural disasters like the Hurricane Sandy. If you take a look at the publication, you will see that they also begin their literature section by defining key concepts relevant in their context. For example, they clearly define what they mean by a natural disaster, citing an existing definition from the literature. Specifically, they write, "A disaster is defined as a disruption that physically affects the system as a whole and threatens its priorities and goals." Similarly, they proceed to deepen the research problem they already outlined in the abstract and introduction. For instance, they point out that the issue that empirical studies on the practices of governmental organizations in disasters management are lacking, with the literature almost exclusively containing conceptual or analytical studies, and consequently no empirical studies. Furthermore, they add that the studies that do exist focus only on a very limited number of European countries. The last section, the so-called conclusion of the literature section, is essentially a further deepening of the problem and a justification for why the study is of great relevance and importance. Specifically, they state that although some studies have already dealt with the question of what practices can be applied when natural disasters occur, the perspective of state organizations is still missing. This is obviously very relevant because such state organizations often play a key leadership role in natural disasters. The third publication we are using as an example is an empirical study that investigated which elements are important in the use of artificial intelligence in the public sector and how these influence the processes in the public sector. As you can see, they also start with defining a concept, in this case artificial intelligence. They also get quite specific about the research problem when they write, "Scholars have started investigating the topic with an increasing number of studies published in the last couple of years, but very scant literature deeply investigates AI and implementation in public sector organizations," and so on and so forth. Similar to the previous examples, they then conclude their critical reflection of the current state of the literature with the words, "Our paper addresses this specific issue," thereby directly underlying the theoretical relevance of their study, which includes introducing the missing governmental perspective. Also note that before opening the methodology chapter, they emphasize why their chosen context is particularly useful to study their research question. In summary, for your literature section, the key takeaway is deepen the problem presented in the introduction, demonstrate that it's more complex than assumed, and position your thesis as an answer or solution to this problem.